Some winters arrive quietly. They brush the earth with a soft breath and move on. But some winters don't come to visit. They come to conquer. Silent, cruel, unforgiving. And when those winters arrive, they don't just freeze the land. They freeze courage. They freeze hope. They freeze the very idea of tomorrow. This is the story of one such winter. A winter that walked into people's homes like an uninvited guest and refused to leave. It began with a wind, not a storm, not a snowfall, just a wind. Thin, sharp, unnaturally cold. A wind that slid through the cracks of old wooden walls and touched the skin like a warning. Children felt it first. They stopped playing outside. Their laughter faded. Their footsteps became quieter. Mothers noticed next. They hurried to finish drying the last pieces of meat. They double-folded blankets. They checked the doors twice, sometimes 3 times. And the fathers, they didn't say much. But every time they stepped outside and saw the gray sky, they felt something dark move in their chest. Every harsh winter has a silence before it, a strange, heavy silence, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The villagers noticed it. Animals sensed it. Even the trees seemed to stand still, waiting. Then came the first snow. Soft, gentle, innocent. The kind of snow children normally run toward. But that year, they didn't. They stood at their windows and watched it fall slowly, as if the sky was warning them. This is only the beginning. Because the first snow is never the problem. It's the 4th, the 10th, the endless one that buries everything beneath it. Within days, the real winter arrived. The kind of winter that doesn't feel like a season. It feels like an enemy. The cold grew sharper. The nights grew longer. The land grew quieter. And food turned from a daily necessity into a memory. Root cellars that once looked full now looked painfully empty. Carrots shriveled into thin sticks. Potatoes softened and rotted. Even the salted meat became so dry that it cracked. A mother held a jar of grain one morning. She shook it gently. The sound it made was too hollow, too light. "We'll make it last, somehow," she whispered to herself. Her husband heard her. He didn't reply, because the truth was something he didn't want to say aloud. Bread was cut thinner. Soup was stretched with more water. Parents pretended they were full so their children could eat one extra bite. It is strange how many lies people tell out of love. Small lies, necessary lies, lies that keep a family alive. But the cold didn't care. Outside, snow piled up against doors as if trying to seal everyone inside. The forests were empty. Birds had vanished. Rivers turned into long, frozen mirrors. One evening, a little boy asked his father, "Baba, where does food go in winter?" The father forced a smile. "It hides, son, just like we do." But deep down, he knew the truth. Food didn't hide. It died. Just like people. Because winter has a way of taking things quietly. And in that season, death had a sound. Not loud, not violent. A quiet sound. A soft sigh. A cough that suddenly stopped. A door that didn't open again. A breath that faded in the middle of the night. Sometimes death sounded like the crackling of wood in the fireplace. A warm sound inside a room that had just lost someone. The cold kills gently, almost politely, as if it doesn't want to disturb the snow. An old man slept too long. A newborn breathed too softly. A traveler sat down just for a moment, and winter claimed him. And people didn't cry loudly. Tears froze before they fell. Voices trembled too much to scream. A mother lifted her child one morning. The child didn't move, didn't respond. Her scream was swallowed by the thick, frozen silence outside. Winter makes grief lonely, very lonely. On the coldest nights, families behaved like one body. They slept close, not out of comfort, but out of fear. Heat wasn't warmth. Heat was survival. So they shared it like bread. The father slept near the door, the coldest, draftiest place, because he wanted his children in the center, protected. Sometimes he woke up shaking, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. His wife touched his hand and said, "You're freezing." He gave a weak laugh. Better me than them. The children slept tangled together like small animals, their breaths mixing, their hands searching for warmth in the darkness. Every morning, the father opened his eyes and listened. One breathing sound. 2, 3. Only then did he exhale, because winter was a thief that stole in silence. Even breathing became painful. The air grew thick, sharp, almost metallic. Every inhale burned the chest. Every exhale fogged the air like smoke. Inside the house, walls grew thin layers of ice. Blankets felt damp. Chairs were cold as stone. A little girl once told her mother, "It hurts to breathe." Her mother held a warm cloth near her nose. "Slowly, dear. The cold can't hurt you if you're patient." But they both knew it could. The cold stings the lungs, dries the throat, makes every breath feel like lifting a heavy weight. People coughed blood. Doctors were days away. Herbal remedies barely helped. So they closed their eyes, pressed a warm hand to their chest, and prayed the air wouldn't betray them. The father would rub his son's back and whisper, "Breathe deep, my boy, even if it hurts." The boy nodded, trying again and again, because winter is not just a test of strength. It is a test of lungs, a test of courage. But perhaps the most dangerous thing in winter is not the cold, not the hunger, not the pain of breathing, is the silence. A silence so thick that it surrounds the house like a second wall. In summer, fear is loud. It comes with storms, with wild animals, with thunder. But winter fear is quiet. It sits in the corners. It hides in the shadow of the fireplace. It crawls into the mind at night. A mother sits beside the fire, holding her child. The flames flicker weakly. The walls groan softly. Her husband says, "It's just the wood expanding." But she feels something else, a heaviness, a warning. And the same thought troubles every home. What if the fire dies tonight? What if the food ends tomorrow? What if someone falls sick? What if the cold wins? Winter turns questions into weapons, questions that cut deeper than frostbite. Even the bravest men wake up at midnight, heart racing, not from cold, but from the fear of losing everything. A father stares at the dying fire, watching the flames shrink. He whispers to himself, "Stay alive. Just stay alive." He isn't talking to the fire. He's talking to his family, to the walls around him, to the small, fragile warmth holding the night at bay. He's talking to himself.
And yet, even after all their struggles, morning never arrived gently. Every dawn felt like a punishment. The cold didn't simply freeze their skin, it crawled inside their bones, whispering that survival was just an illusion. When they opened their eyes, the air was so sharp it could cut the throat. Breathing felt like swallowing needles. Sometimes their chests tightened so badly that even taking a single breath felt like pulling a heavy stone out of a frozen lake. Inside the shelter, the silence was loud. Not peaceful, but threatening. The type of silence where everyone listens for one thing: the sound of someone not waking up. Some mornings, a mother would shake her little boy, hoping he was simply sleeping, but he wasn't. And she learned what grief truly sounded like, a sound that didn't escape the mouth, but broke quietly inside the heart. Families didn't cry loudly. Tears turned to ice before reaching the skin. They just held each other, letting their shared warmth become the only shield they had left. Food became something they no longer ate, but something they searched for, fought for, prayed for. When they found nothing, they chewed on hope, and even that was running out. Inside their small winter hut, shadows moved across the walls, not from lights, but from the fire struggling to stay alive. The flame was tiny, trembling, as if it were afraid of the cold too. Every time it flickered, their hearts jumped, because if that fire died, their stories would end with it. One evening, an old man whispered, "We are not fighting winter. We are fighting the fear that winter puts inside us. Fear of dying, fear of losing each other, fear of closing their eyes and never opening them again. But the most terrifying fear was the fear of forgetting what warmth felt like." Sometimes, in the darkest hours, they talked quietly, sharing memories of summers they once knew. A boy said, "Do you remember the sound of rain? Not snow, but real rain." A woman replied slowly, "I remember the smell of warm soil." And for a moment, that memory felt like a blanket around them. But the wind outside didn't care about memories. It screamed through the cracks, howling like a wounded animal, reminding them that the world outside was not their friend. Still, they refused to give up. One man stood near the door, listening to the storm. His hands were shaking, but his eyes carried a quiet determination. He whispered to himself, "If cold wants to kill us, then let it try. We are not dying tonight." He stepped outside, his breath turning into a white cloud, his boots sinking into snow so deep it swallowed his ankles. The sky looked dead. No moon, no stars, only darkness. He walked toward the forest, searching for anything, a fallen branch, a dry leaf, a sign of life. But the forest was silent, frozen stiff. Even the trees looked like ghosts. Every step hurt his skin, his beard filled with ice. His eyelids felt too heavy to keep open. But still he moved, because inside that shelter, people were depending on him. People who trusted him, people who believed in him. He found a tree trunk, its bark dry enough to burn, and he whispered, "Thank you, whoever still watches over us." Dragging the wood back through the snow, he felt his legs weakening. The cold was winning. His heartbeat slowed. His fingers stopped responding. He fell once, then twice, but he didn't give up. When he reached the shelter, someone opened the door. Warm arms pulled him inside, voices trembling with relief. "You made it," a little girl said softly, her eyes shining with gratitude. He smiled faintly, not because he was strong, but because he was human. And humans, they don't survive alone. They survive together. That night, the fire grew bright again. The room filled with a soft golden glow, a reminder that even in the worst winter, warmth still exists, and hope does too. But winter wasn't done testing them. Outside, snow kept falling, the storm grew louder, the temperature dropped to a level no living creature deserved to feel. And somewhere in the darkness, a new challenge waited, one they didn't know was coming. A challenge that would push them to the edge, force them to face decisions no human should ever make. But that part of the story is only just beginning.
The hidden architecture of medieval homes, warmth shaped by clay, straw, and wood. Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about buildings, it's about survival. It's about how ordinary people, armed with nothing but earth, straw, and their bare hands, built shelters that could fight against winters cruel enough to break the spirit of an entire generation. When the world was colder, when nights were long, when snow didn't fall softly but attacked like a storm of knives, a home wasn't just a home, it was a lifeline. And every tiny detail inside those medieval houses, every wall, every beam, every corner, held a story of struggle, intelligence, and quiet human genius. What did those homes really look like? From the outside, they looked simple, almost too simple. A sloped roof, thick walls, a tiny door you had to bend your head to enter, smoke curling out from a hole at the top. But once you stepped inside, it felt like stepping into another world. Dim light, a warm, earthy smell, shadows dancing on the wall from a small fire. The soft sound of breathing, human and animal mixing together. It didn't look like luxury, it didn't look like strength, but it felt safe, and in that age, safety was luxury. The secret of their walls, clay, straw, and wood, the walls were not random. They were crafted with purpose. First, they made a wooden frame, thick beams locked together, almost like the skeleton of a giant animal. Then came the magic mixture: clay, mud, straw, sometimes even animal dung. To someone today, that might sound dirty, but back then, it was brilliant engineering. Clay kept out the wind, straw trapped tiny pockets of warm air. Dung acted like natural glue, holding everything tight. Together, these turned into walls so thick you could punch them, kick them, push on them, and they would never move. Inside those walls lived something that truly saved lives: insulation, not the kind made in factories, the kind made by nature, by hand, by need. And that insulation did one simple thing: it caught heat and refused to let it escape. The insulation trick they learned through suffering. They didn't discover insulation in books. There were no architects drawing fancy lines. They discovered it through nights when cold felt like death, through mornings when frost covered the floor, through years of trial, error, and tears. Slowly they realized if you pack straw between two layers of clay, the walls stay warm. If you use wooden beams tightly, wind can't find a way inside. If the roof is steep, snow slides off instead of crushing the home. Everything they built was built because winter forced them to think, and that thinking saved generations. The mystery of the small doors in windows. People often ask, why were their doors so small? Why were their windows tiny slits instead of real windows? The answer is simple and powerful. Because large openings were invitations, not to people, but to the cold. A small door meant less heat escaping every time someone entered. A small window meant sunlight could enter, but the frozen wind stayed outside. Sometimes they covered windows with animal skins or thin pieces of stretched stomach lining to let faint light pass through while keeping the winter away. Imagine that, using every part of an animal not just for food but for survival engineering. That was their world. Why humans and animals slept together. It wasn't strange back then. It wasn't dirty. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was necessity. Cows, goats, sheep, even chickens, inside the same room. You might wonder why. Because animals produce heat, real, living warmth. A cow alone could warm the entire space through the night. Their breaths, their bodies, their presence were part of the heating system. People slept closer to the fire. Animals slept slightly farther, but all in one shared universe of survival. It didn't matter who was human and who wasn't. In that kind of winter, warmth was warmth. The art of trapping heat, their greatest skill. They didn't have heaters, no electricity, no metal stoves, only fire and their intelligence. So they built their homes like this. Low ceilings to trap heat, thick walls to store warmth, like a battery central fire pit, so heat spread evenly. No large openings, floors lined with straw to stop cold from rising, roofs made of thatch acting like natural insulation. And here's something very few people know. Sometimes they built the floor lower than ground level. Why? Because cold air sinks and warm air rises. A lowered floor created a pocket where heat stayed longer. It was primitive science, but it worked better than anyone today would imagine. The heart of the home, the fire wasn't just for warmth. It was the soul of the house. People sat around it, talked around it, fought around it, cried around it, prayed around it. Every spark was a reminder that they were still alive. The smoke rose through a small hole in the roof, a hole placed exactly right so that the fire pulled air inward instead of suffocating the room. Accident? No, it was architectural wisdom passed down from one generation to another. This was not just a house, it was a living machine designed for survival. The beauty of their struggle when you imagine those medieval homes, don't imagine weakness. Imagine courage. Imagine creativity shaped by suffering. Imagine people who refuse to surrender to the cold. Homes made of mud and straw, but filled with strength, with hope, with life. They built warmth in a world built of ice. And those small, humble houses, those tiny glowing shelters under a frozen sky, are the reason their children lived, their stories survived, and we are here today. The nights grew colder as the winter deepened. Fires burned low, whispering faint light across the walls, and shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Inside, the air smelled of straw, clay, and the warmth of human and animal breath mingled together. It was a living warmth, fragile, but it was enough, for now. People moved slowly, carefully, so as not to disturb the heat. Every movement was intentional, every breath measured. The floors were covered with straw, thick enough to soften the chill seeping from the ground. And even in this modest home, they found ways to capture the smallest fragment of comfort. Children huddled close to the fire, their eyes wide, listening to the crackle of flames. A goat slept beside the wall, its warmth rising slowly, a silent guardian of life. The mother adjusted blankets around the little ones, tucking them close, whispering softly, "It's all right, we are safe here for tonight." The walls themselves seemed to breathe warmth. Every inch of clay and straw had been packed by hands that understood the cruel language of frost. Even the roof, made of thick thatch, trapped heat like a living creature. And every small opening, the tiny doors, the slit-like windows, was intentional. Every design choice a subtle rebellion against the winter that threatened to swallow them whole. Some nights the wind pressed against the walls, trying to find a way in. It moaned through cracks and crevices, rattled the door, and shook the beams above. But the walls stood firm, unyielding, a testament to generations of trial and error. They had learned through years of suffering that survival demanded patience, observation, and a willingness to adapt. The people inside were not idle observers. They fed the fire slowly, adding pieces of wood, straw, and sometimes dry dung to keep the warmth alive. The smoke spiraled upward through the small hole in the roof, designed perfectly to draw air in, allowing the fire to breathe while the room stayed protected. It was a delicate balance, one wrong move and the fire could die, taking life with it. Animals were more than companions, they were partners in survival. Their bodies radiated heat that mingled with human warmth, turning the small space into a living incubator of life. People had learned to coexist with them, to sleep close, to share the same breaths, understanding that in a world where cold could kill in the night, warmth was worth every sacrifice. In the quiet moments when the fire burned low and the wind's voice faded, people would talk softly, sometimes to each other, sometimes to themselves. They shared stories of summers long gone, of sunny fields and running rivers, of rain dripping from leaves instead of snow from frozen trees. These memories became blankets of the mind, wrapping them in hope even as their bodies shivered. Sometimes the elders would remind the young ones of the cleverness in the home itself. "See these walls," they would say, "they are our shield." Not made of stone or iron, but of wisdom passed from mother to daughter, father to son. The children would listen intently, eyes wide with awe, learning that even in hardship there was knowledge. There was power. Fire was central to every thought, every action. Its light was more than illumination, it was reassurance, courage, life. People would gather around it, telling stories, humming songs, sometimes praying silently as the flames danced. It was a rhythm of existence, a heartbeat in the long, frozen night. The rooms themselves taught lessons of survival. Low ceilings kept heat trapped, thick walls stored every ounce of warmth, and even the floors were part of the architecture's cunning design. They had discovered that cold air sinks, that warmth rises, and they built homes that respected this truth instinctively, without books, without instruction, just observation, patience, and necessity. Every breath inside these homes carried gratitude. Even when the cold nipped at their skin and the wind howled outside, inside there was a fragile peace, a quiet defiance. People had mastered a delicate equilibrium, turning a house made of humble materials into a sanctuary, a bastion against the cruel winter outside, and through it all, hope persisted. It lived in the fire's glow, in the warmth shared by family and animals, in the careful construction of every wall, every roof, every door. It persisted in small smiles, quiet words, and in the simple act of surviving another night, because these homes were not just shelters, they were a testament. A testament to human ingenuity, endurance, and the stubborn will to live. And in the darkest, coldest hours, they whispered a truth that echoed through centuries. Where there is thought, care, and courage, there is warmth, there is life, there is hope. Even in the dead of winter.
Warriors against the cold. Clothing, furs, and strange methods to keep warm. Some winters arrive silently, almost unnoticed, until you step outside and the air feels like a wall of knives. Then, survival becomes more than finding shelter. It becomes a battle you wear on your very body. People learned early that the body could fight the cold if it was properly armed, and the armor wasn't metal. It wasn't leather. It was fabric, fur, and cunning inherited from generations who refused to freeze. They layered clothing like warriors donning invisible shields. A thin shirt beneath a thicker tunic, a woolen vest over that, and then the outermost layer, heavy windproof stuffed with straw or animal hair. Every layer slowed the cold. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't light. But it was life. The wool from sheep became one of their greatest allies. Soft, thick, and surprisingly warm, it wrapped the body in a blanket that refused to surrender. Every thread, every curl, was a barrier against the winter wind. People wore it on their arms, their legs, their heads, any place the frost could touch. For the fiercest days, they turned to predators. The skins of wolves, foxes, and other animals that braved the forest were transformed into cloaks and coats. It was ironic, perhaps, to wear the skin of a hunter to survive a different kind of hunt. The hunt for warmth. The fur trapped heat, but the leather underneath kept wind from seeping in, and when bundled together, it became almost impenetrable. Boots were not an afterthought. They were engineered for survival. Thick leather, sometimes stuffed with insulation, kept feet dry, warm, and moving forward. Every piece mattered. Straw, sometimes lined with fur. Every step a careful negotiation with snow, ice, and hidden frost beneath. They learned that cold feet could betray the whole body. Warm feet meant the blood flowed. Blood meant life. Inside their homes, beds were more than places to sleep. They were laboratories of warmth. Straw was layered meticulously, first thickly on the floor, then in mounds, then tucked under the body. People slept curled, sometimes with animals beside them, letting the combined warmth of every living creature create a small universe of heat. Even the way they moved was part of the strategy. Hands were tucked close, chins pressed to chests, elbows wrapped around knees. Every posture, every movement, a negotiation with the cold. Sometimes they would rock slightly as they slept, bodies generating the tiniest motion that turned into heat, keeping the frost at bay. Lessons early. Not in words alone, but in action. Curl like this, said a mother, and the wind won't touch you. Share your warmth with the goat, instructed the father, and you will both survive the night. The lessons were instinctual, a dance between biology and wisdom. And when people ventured outside, they did so fully armored. Furs draped over shoulders, boots tightly bound, gloves thick, almost cumbersome, but necessary. Caps, hoods, scarves, every inch covered. They had learned to move like shadows through the snow, conserving energy, keeping heat, surviving the brutal environment that threatened to take them with each gust of wind. They discovered strange tricks, too, breathing slowly, rhythmically, to prevent frostbite in the lungs, keeping blood flowing in arms and legs by small movements, even when the mind wanted to freeze in place. Even the way they ate mattered. Hot broth, small sips, slow meals that fueled the fire inside the body. Every night, the same battle repeated indoors. The fire glowed, the walls held, the people huddled, and yet survival was not passive, it was active. A constant strategy of layers, heat, movement, and careful planning. Some nights, when the storm raged outside, mothers would whisper stories, not to entertain, but to teach. Stories of hunters who crossed frozen rivers, children who learned to wear a dozen layers without complaint, and elders who survived the frostbite that would have felled others. Every word, every pause, a lesson in resilience. The warmth in the home was never just heat. It was the sum of knowledge, instinct, and care. The clothing they wore, the skins they draped, the beds they constructed, everything worked in harmony. Every method was borrowed from centuries of trial and error, and in every layer, every fur, every straw-filled blanket, there was love. Love that whispered to the cold, "We will not let you take us. We will survive tonight. We will survive tomorrow." The nights were long, colder than any tongue could describe. Even with furs and layered clothing, the wind crept through every gap, every crack, as if it were searching for weakness. Inside, people moved carefully, almost reverently, around the fire, their breath rising in small clouds, mingling with the smoke that curled toward the roof. Beds were arranged meticulously, straw thick beneath the body, softer layers tucked around limbs, and sometimes animals nestled close. A goat's warmth here, a dog's there, each pulse of life adding a layer of heat. The smallest shift, the tiniest movement, mattered. They had learned that survival depended not only on fire or clothing, but on the subtle energy of living bodies. They slept curled, knees to chest, arms pressed in, heads tucked close to shoulders, breathing slowly to preserve the heat, letting every exhale drift above the straw rather than into the frozen floor. Learned early how to hold their hands close, how to breathe shallowly when the cold threatened to steal their warmth. Every lesson was practical, instinctual, but also sacred, passed from parent to child in whispers, touches, and patient example. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the home became a small universe of warmth. Fur coats draped over shoulders even at night, caps covering heads, boots still on sometimes, because any moment without insulation could tip the balance between life and death. Parents watched their children sleep, hands hovering near tiny bodies, feeling the rise and fall of breath, ready to respond to a shiver, a sigh, a cough. The cold had its own rhythm, sharp and merciless. It tested them. It forced them to think creatively, to observe, to adapt. And humans rose to that challenge with extraordinary ingenuity. They learned that keeping extremities moving slightly, even in sleep, kept blood circulating, that pressing together, sharing body heat with another person or animal, amplified warmth beyond what any clothing alone could provide. Hot drinks became rituals, broth warm and thin, sipped slowly, fueling not just the body, but the fire inside. People understood their own biology better than anyone in a warmer world could. They controlled their breathing, preserved their energy, managed their circulation, all without conscious thought most of the time. Even clothing carried subtle wisdom. Leather boots were stuffed just enough with straw to prevent frostbite. Hoods and caps trapped air near the head. Layering created pockets of trapped warmth. Outer furs shielded the skin from wind. Every item was a piece of armor in a war they fought constantly. Sometimes even the position of the body mattered. Lying with the back against a wall, curled slightly toward the fire, the heat reflected and, trapped within the room, became almost unbearable in its comfort. Small adjustments in posture, subtle rotations during sleep, preserved life in a way invisible to the untrained eye. People whispered to each other at night, sometimes for comfort, sometimes for strategy. You need to move your feet slightly. Curl your arms in. Keep the goat close. Each word, each instruction was a lifeline in the frozen darkness. Parents taught children to trust instinct over thought when it came to warmth, to feel where the cold gathered, to adjust blankets, layers, and positioning without hesitation. It was a knowledge carved from survival, passed on silently and urgently, because a moment's mistake could mean frostbite or worse. They had strange rituals to maximize heat, sleeping in the same direction, arranging their bodies to create circulating warmth, using every available surface, straw, fur, animal, human, to build microclimates within the home. Every house was a small ecosystem of warmth, a living, breathing entity of survival. And even in the deepest night, they found moments of awe. The flicker of firelight against the walls, the soft sound of snow sliding from the roof, the synchronized breathing of bodies pressed close together. In these moments, the harsh winter seemed almost beautiful, relentless, but inspiring. Through it all, their creativity and resilience never wavered. They discovered that the human body, carefully armored, positioned, and nourished, could withstand temperatures that would kill an unprepared traveler in minutes. They learned the secret of layering, of body heat, of careful sleep patterns, turning instinct and biology into a finely tuned survival system. Even when exhaustion threatened, when the cold seemed to seep inside bones and lungs, the methods they had developed kept them alive. Straw and furs, layered clothing, tight boots, huddling together, controlled breathing, all became second nature, performed without thought, a choreography of survival. And morning always arrived, pale light creeping across the frost-covered windows, breathless animals stirring, children peeking from under layers of blankets, eyes wide, bodies trembling, but alive. Every dawn was a victory, every day a testament to human ingenuity, to the strange, brilliant, painstaking methods people discovered to fight the cold, to the courage, patience, and cleverness that made survival in the harshest winters possible. Even in the bitterest cold, even in darkness that stretched beyond the imagination, humans endured. They adapted, they invented warmth, and they passed these lessons down, layer by layer, from parent to child, from generation to generation, because in a world of ice and wind, where death could come silently in the night, their clothing, their furs, their careful sleeping arrangements, and their clever strategies were not mere convenience. They were life itself. They were defiance. They were the invisible warriors that kept humanity alive. Nights around the fire. Wood, flame, heated stones, and the science of keeping warm. The night arrives slowly, almost silently. Outside, the wind hammers against the walls of their shelters, rattling every beam, whistling through every crack. Snow piles higher with each gust, and the cold isn't just in the air. It creeps into the bones, into the chest, into the very rhythm of breathing. Inside, there is fire, a tiny flame flickering against the shadows. But that flame is everything. It is warmth, life, comfort, hope. It is the line between surviving and succumbing to the frozen night. Lighting the fire is an art. It begins with small things, dry twigs, shavings of wood, and sometimes a spark from flint or stone. Every piece must be prepared carefully. Too wet, and the flame dies before it breathes. Too small, and it will be swallowed by the cold. It's a delicate negotiation, a balance of patience. Skill and intuition. Wood is scarce. Every piece is precious. They learned to ration it, to store it meticulously, and to burn it strategically. A large log isn't thrown on all at once. It is placed deliberately, fed into the fire gradually, so that the flame endures long into the night. Every ember is accounted for, every spark cherished. Sometimes, when the night is particularly bitter, they use heated stones. Flat rocks placed near the fire absorb the heat slowly, then radiate it back into the room long after the flames die down. The warmth of those stones is subtle but life-saving. People would gather close to them, pressing their bodies against the stones, absorbing the residual heat as if touching fragments of summer itself in the dead of winter. The fire is never left unattended. They know what happens if it dies. Darkness isn't the enemy, it's the cold that comes with it. Without fire, the walls of the home feel empty, the straw turns into frost, and the night becomes a predator waiting silently to claim the warmth that once protected them. Smoke is a constant companion. It curls upward, filling the room with a pungent, stinging presence. Sometimes it chokes, makes eyes water, makes lungs ache. Yet the smoke is also life. It warns them, it guides the flame, it interacts with the heat, pushing warmth into the right corners, keeping frost at bay. They learn to breathe around it, to endure it, because without the fire, smoke is meaningless. But without smoke, fire can betray them too. Every night, maintaining a fire becomes a ritual. Logs are added carefully. Heat is measured instinctively. Ashes are moved, coals fanned, stones shifted. Even the smallest motion can change the balance between life and death. Children watch silently, absorbing every gesture, every adjustment. Parents do not speak unnecessarily. They allow observation to teach the rules of survival. Small hands eventually learn to add wood without crushing the flame. Small eyes learn to notice the faint signs of a fire about to falter. Even the youngest understand, instinctively, that the fire is sacred. The glow of flames transforms the space. Shadows flicker across walls. Straw and wood smell sweet against the bitter air outside. Even the smallest ember feels like a heartbeat, reminding everyone that life persists, that warmth is possible, and that the long night can be endured. When the fire threatens to die, urgency spreads. People move quickly, hands shaking, hearts racing. The difference between a few seconds of hesitation and a renewed flame is survival. They pile wood, blow gently, reposition stones, and coax the embers back to life. Every motion is precise, every decision critical. Sometimes, in desperation, they carry embers from one room to another. A dying flame becomes the seed of survival in another corner. Even ashes have purpose. They can hold heat temporarily, protect small sparks, and keep the night from claiming everything. Fire also dictates movement. People arrange themselves around it deliberately. The closest get the warmth they need most. The farthest adjust their bodies, layering themselves with furs, absorbing what heat they can, and learning patience, endurance, and observation as survival tools. There is no comfort in these nights, only life sustained by constant attention. Every moment carries tension, a wrong step, a misplaced log, a flicker too weak, a stone shifted incorrectly. Yet in this tension there is beauty. It is human ingenuity in its purest form, creativity born not from curiosity, but from necessity. As the night deepens, the fire becomes a living presence. Its crackle is a song, its glow a shield. Every flicker tells a story, every ember carries the memory of countless nights survived before. They learned the secret of timing. Not every log goes on the fire at once. Some burn slowly, some faster, some are held back for later. It's a dance between wood, heat, and human need. Too much at once and the flames roar uncontrollably, wasting precious warmth. Too little and the fire dies, leaving the cold to creep in silently, like a predator. Heated stones are perhaps their greatest innovation. Rough, uneven rocks, carefully selected, warmed by the fire for hours. Once fully heated, they are moved to beds or corners of the home. Their heat radiates slowly, steady, relentless, providing warmth even when the flames falter. People press against them, hands, feet, backs, absorbing life from stone. Simple, yet profound. A connection between human body and the enduring heat of the earth itself. Smoke, ever present, is both friend and adversary. It stings the eyes, it chokes the throat. Yet it is also a guardian. It signals when the fire needs more fuel. It keeps insects away. It pushes heat and subtle currents through the room. People learn to breathe around it, to read it like a map, to understand its moods and messages. Keeping the fire alive through the long night is not a task for one person. It is a shared duty, a responsibility passed silently among the family. One tends the logs, another shifts the stones, a third fans the embers. Even the children participate, small hands nudging a spark into a safer corner, eyes alert for signs of dying flame. Every movement carries the weight of survival. When wood runs low, panic is never far. People ration, they save small pieces, they burn carefully. Every twig, every scrap becomes sacred. They have learned the value of patience, of thinking ahead, of respecting the fragile dance of flame and warmth. Outside, the storm presses in relentlessly, but inside, the room hums with the careful management of fire. The heated stones pulse softly. The flames dance in rhythmic patterns. The smoke curls like gentle fingers, touching every corner without suffocating. It is a fragile equilibrium maintained by constant attention and centuries of learned wisdom. Sleep is lighter than usual, punctuated by moments of attention. A shift in embers, a crack of wood, a sigh in the night. These demand response. They have learned that even a moment of neglect can cost precious warmth. Yet despite this vigilance, there is comfort. A fire, properly managed, transforms the coldest night into a sanctuary. It becomes the heart of the home, beating with warmth, courage, and persistence. And yet, danger is always near. A sudden gust can smother the flame. A careless hand can scatter the embers. If the fire dies, darkness and cold invade swiftly. The walls that once held warmth now feel like ice. Every precaution, every ritual is a bulwark against that moment. The way they arrange their homes, their stones, their logs, every detail is intentional. Heat circulates efficiently. Smoke escapes without choking. Beds and floors are placed strategically near residual warmth. Even minor adjustments, a log slightly tilted, a stone moved closer, can make the difference between frostbite and survival. Children learn not just by instruction, but by observation. They watch their parents tend the fire. They mimic small actions. They absorb the rhythm of survival. By the time they are old enough to venture outside in the biting cold, they know instinctively how to preserve warmth, how to tend the fire, how to manage smoke. And when the night finally gives way to dawn, when the first pale light seeps across frosted windows, there is a quiet celebration. The fire still glows. The heated stones still radiate. Everyone is alive. It is not luxury. It is not comfort. It is life itself. A product of human intelligence, ingenuity, and relentless determination. Through careful management of wood, flame, heated stones, and smoke, they have turned a frozen night into a space of survival, learning, and resilience. These nights around the fire were more than survival. They were lessons, stories, rituals. Each flame carried the wisdom of generations. Each ember whispered secrets of warmth, endurance, and human ingenuity. And through it all, people learned what it truly means to fight the cold. Not with fear, but with knowledge, care, and unwavering attention. Because in the end, the fire is not just warmth. It is life. It is hope. It is proof that humans, even against the fiercest cold, can endure. And as long as they keep the flame alive, no winter is unconquerable. The snow lay thick on the ground, a white blanket stretching as far as the eye could see. It muffled the sounds of life, hiding the rhythms of the earth beneath its cold, frozen weight. And yet, life persisted. Even under the relentless frost, humans found a way to grow, to eat, to survive. Winter was not a season of surrender. It was a season of ingenuity. People learned that beneath the frozen soil, the earth still held warmth. It was subtle, hidden, but enough to allow certain crops to endure. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots, hardy cabbages, and certain grains could push through the frost, or at least lie dormant, waiting for the slightest thaw to awaken again. Farms were transformed into intricate puzzles of survival. Small plots, carefully arranged, often protected by straw or layers of dead leaves, acted as insulation, a fragile barrier against the harsh bite of winter. Microclimates of their land, the gentle slopes, the sheltered hollows, the places where snow melted first and the soil remained most forgiving. Storage became as important as cultivation. Grains harvested in the fall were carefully dried, then stored in wooden bins or clay jars. Sometimes they buried food beneath layers of straw in underground pits, where the frost could not reach, and the earth itself kept the food from spoiling. Every kernel, every vegetable, every root was precious, a lifeline in a season where the world above seemed dead. Animal husbandry was woven into this system seamlessly. Sheep, goats, and cattle were not just sources of milk, meat, and hides. They were warmth, food, and security. Their presence near homes added heat during the coldest nights, and their waste, dung mixed with straw, was sometimes used to insulate the floors or feed fires. Animals and humans were partners in survival, a vital role in enduring the frozen months. Harvesting food in winter required patience and creativity. Some vegetables were stored beneath snow, covered carefully with straw, allowing families to dig them out slowly as needed, preserving freshness for weeks. Fruits were dried, grains ground and stored in barrels, and salted or smoked meat provided sustenance when fresh food was scarce. People developed clever methods for making the earth itself part of their pantry. Snow was cleared strategically from key areas, allowing sunlight to reach patches of soil that could produce hardy winter crops. Row covers, thick mats of straw, and temporary shelters shielded young plants from frostbite. Even in the heart of winter, small green shoots could be coaxed from the soil, a quiet miracle of endurance. The barns and granaries were fortified. Thick walls and thatched roofs kept food dry and animals alive. Layers of straw and hay acted as insulation, preserving both the warmth and the food. Every stored sack of grain, every bundle of dried herbs, every barrel of salted meat was accounted for. Families knew exactly how long their supplies could last, and they rationed carefully, turning necessity into a rhythm of daily survival. Children played a role in these winter farms too. They helped gather hay, checked on animals, dug small caches of vegetables, and learned the delicate art of rationing food for weeks when the snow refused to relent. Every child absorbed lessons about patience, foresight, and the hidden generosity of the land beneath winter's white shroud. Farms themselves became a dance of heat, life, and conservation. Smoke from fires drifted into barns, keeping animals warm. Ash and straw insulated floors. Stored crops were layered in ways that preserved them from both cold and damp. Even small details, like the placement of a barrel or the orientation of a granary, could mean the difference between hunger and plenty. People also learned to use snow itself creatively. It could be a protective layer for root vegetables, keeping the soil underneath from freezing completely. Snow walls shielded greenhouses or temporary shelters, reducing wind exposure. Even frozen rivers and ponds were sometimes used as cold storage, a natural refrigerator that preserved meat and certain crops without decay. Food was more than sustenance, it was strategy. Families planned months in advance, predicting which crops would survive, how to rotate storage, how to use every scrap efficiently. Nothing went to waste. Bones were boiled for broth, husks for animal bedding, scraps for compost or fire. Every calorie, every ounce of nutrition was precious. Even in the harshest blizzards, people moved with purpose. They dug carefully through snowdrifts, caches, and rotated, stored food. It was a quiet, patient labor, sometimes exhausting, often monotonous, but it was the rhythm that sustained life through the long months of frost. And despite the cold, there was beauty in this system. The quiet crackle of a fire near the granary, the gentle lowing of a cow in a straw-filled barn, the first green shoot breaking through snow, a reminder that life persists even under the hardest winter. Winter agriculture was not just survival. It was a science born of necessity. Observation, experimentation, and tradition combined to create a fragile but reliable system. Families learned which crops could endure, how to store them, how to feed and warm animals, and how to manage both food and fire to endure the months when the world seemed lifeless. And in this delicate balance, there was resilience. Every harvest, every preserved vegetable, every barrel of grain was a triumph of human ingenuity and patience over the indifferent cold. They learned that with planning, care, and knowledge, even the harshest winter could be survived, and life could flourish quietly beneath the frost. As the nights grew longer and the snow deepened, the work of survival became more deliberate. Families moved quietly between barns and storage rooms, checking on the fruits of months of labor. Every sack of grain, every barrel of salted meat, every hidden root vegetable was a treasure and needed careful attention. The soil beneath the snow was not forgotten. People learned to dig shallow trenches, sometimes covered with straw or leafy branches, to protect root vegetables from the harshest freezes. Even under several feet of snow, the earth retained subtle warmth, enough to prevent spoilage. A carrot or turnip could be retrieved weeks later, still firm, still nourishing. Granaries became sacred spaces, built with thick walls of wood or clay, insulated with straw, hay, or even layers of animal hides. These structures were carefully maintained. Every door, every vent, every corner was designed to prevent frost creeping in. Families inspected them daily, removing damp straw, rotating barrels, and making sure that the food remained dry and protected. Animals played a constant role in winter survival.
Cows, goats, and sheep were housed close to human dwellings, their body heat radiating warmth into barns and nearby rooms.
Sheep's wool was used for blankets, milk was turned into cheese that could last for months, and meat, salted or smoked, provided sustenance when the snow prevented hunting or foraging. The rhythms of feeding, watering, and tending animals became as crucial as tending the crops themselves. Winter livestock management required foresight. Hay and fodder were rationed carefully. Animals were grouped strategically to maximize warmth. Sometimes small fires were kept burning in barns, not to harm, but to provide a gentle protective heat. The balance was delicate. Too little, and animals suffered. Too much, and the fire could become a hazard. Even children were trained in the nuances of winter farming. They learned to measure snow cover, to judge which areas of the field were still fertile, and to help uncover hidden caches of vegetables. Tasks were often small, repetitive, but vital. Shifting straw, moving barrels, checking on frozen roots. Through this work, they absorbed lessons in patience, responsibility, and the fragile interconnection between humans, animals, and the earth. Preservation of food was an ongoing challenge. Vegetables could be stored beneath layers of straw or even in snowbanks, where the cold slowed decay. Fruits were dried, berries preserved in jars, and meat salted or smoked to last through the long months. Every meal was planned in advance, rationed carefully, and distributed to ensure survival through lean periods. Even the smallest scraps were used: bones for broth, husks for bedding. Compost, whey for animals, nothing was wasted. People also developed clever methods to extend the lifespan of stored crops. Clay pots buried in insulated pits acted as natural refrigerators. Grains were aerated to prevent mold. Vegetables were layered in straw with careful spacing to prevent rot. Even the orientation of storage rooms and placement of barrels mattered, taking advantage of sunlight, residual warmth, and airflow. The combination of agriculture and animal husbandry created a self-sustaining winter system. Crops nourished humans. Animals provided milk, warmth, and manure. Humans tended both with care, creating a cycle that could endure even the harshest blizzards. Through observation, experimentation, and learned tradition, families transformed a frozen landscape into a livable, sustainable environment. Winter survival was not passive. It demanded constant attention, awareness, and adaptation. The smallest oversight, a barrel left damp, a straw layer displaced, an animal left too cold, could have serious consequences. Yet in these challenges, humans discovered ingenuity, patience, and resilience. Every successful harvest beneath the snow, every preserved root, every barrel of grain was a testament to foresight and determination. And despite the severity of winter, there were moments of quiet triumph. The first vegetables dug from beneath snowbanks, a steaming bowl of preserved roots or dried grains, the warm breath of animals in a straw-lined barn. Celebrated quietly, a reminder that life persisted even under the relentless frost. By the end of winter, families had survived not only through strength and courage, but through intelligence and careful planning. They had turned frozen fields into hidden larders, snow-covered barns into protected havens, and harsh winters into cycles of life and renewal. Every seed planted, every animal tended, every barrel rotated was a lesson in resilience, survival, and the enduring bond between humans and the land. In this delicate balance of frost, fire, food, and foresight, people found mastery over the cold. Even when the landscape seemed desolate, life continued beneath the snow, nurtured by knowledge, care, and relentless attention. Winter farming was not just a necessity, it was an art, a science, a testament to human endurance and the unbreakable will to survive. And when the first signs of spring finally emerged, green shoots trickling, streams, softer winds, families could look back at the months of labor, the nights of vigilance, the intricate systems of survival, and know that they had endured, adapted, and thrived. Through frost and snow, they had preserved life. Through ingenuity and care, They had made the impossible possible. They had farmed beneath the snow and survived. The cold never truly sleeps. Even when dawn arrives, the frost clings stubbornly to the earth, to the roofs, to the very air itself. It is relentless, testing every human instinct, every strategy, every ounce of resilience. And yet, life persists, not just survives, but endures, adapts, and even thrives in subtle, ingenious ways. In the frozen world, humans became masters of improvisation. They discovered methods to conserve heat in homes, to shield themselves from the wind, and to harness the smallest sources of warmth to maximum effect. They learned that proximity mattered, not only to fires and heated stones, but to each other. Bodies pressed together, shared warmth, a living shield against the frost creeping inside. Even their movements were strategic. Every step outside, every moment spent in the open air, was calculated. They layered clothing not just for insulation, but for flexibility. Labor called, they could bend, lift, and tend without losing precious heat. Furs, skins, and woven fabrics were carefully combined, creating microenvironments around the body. Every fold, every stitch, every layer was intentional, a small engineering triumph in the battle against cold. Sleeping arrangements were equally precise. Families huddled, positioning themselves to share warmth. Children learned to curl into the smallest possible space without compromising circulation. Parents monitored every breath, every shiver, every subtle movement of their loved ones. Heat was measured instinctively, shared willingly, and protected fiercely. The art of tending fire remained central. Fires were never left alone. Logs were managed meticulously, embers fanned with practiced gestures, heated stones rotated to maximize their warmth. Smoke was read like a map, guiding actions and signaling danger. Ingenuity took over. Small twigs, dried leaves, even dung mixed with straw, all became tools of survival. Food was stored with equal care. Grains, vegetables, and preserved meats were rotated regularly. Buried caches beneath layers of straw, ice, or snow ensured that frost would not destroy their stores. Families rationed carefully, learned to stretch every morsel, and celebrated even the smallest harvests. Animals played dual roles, as sources of nutrition and warmth, and were tended with vigilance and affection. Even in such harsh conditions, there were lessons in patience and observation. Every frost pattern, every subtle change in wind, every shift in snow cover carried meaning. People learned to read their environment, to anticipate danger, and to act before the cold could strike. Life became a constant negotiation with the elements, a dialogue with frost, wind, snow, and ice. In the quiet of night, when the world was muffled beneath blankets of snow, humans relied on subtle routines to survive. Movement was deliberate, breathing controlled, touch shared. They learned that warmth was not only a physical phenomenon, but a social one. Shared bodies, shared labor, shared vigilance, all contributing to the preservation of life. Every tool, every technique, every tradition had a purpose. Heated stones radiated slowly. Furs trapped precious air. Firelight guided movement. Meals were carefully timed and portions measured. Even the smallest details, a straw shift here, a log rotated there, could tip the balance between comfort and peril. Children absorbed these lessons as if by instinct. They watched, mimicked, and participated. Through simple tasks, moving a stone, adjusting a blanket, feeding an animal, they became attuned to the rhythms of survival. By the time they faced the open snow, they carried within them centuries of learned knowledge, ready to endure the harshest winters. Even storytelling became a tool of survival. Through whispers by the fire, through lessons passed quietly in shadowed rooms, knowledge was preserved. Which routes survived frost, how to manage smoke, how to ration grain, every tale, every warning, every small secret became part of a collective memory, passed from one generation to the next. By midwinter, homes were transformed into microcosms of life and warmth. Fires crackled, stones glowed, animals slept nearby, and humans huddled together. Even when the world outside seemed frozen and unyielding, life inside was active, purposeful, and protected. Every breath, every movement, every careful action was a declaration. We endure, we survive, we thrive, even in the heart of ice. And when finally the snow begins to melt, when the first subtle hints of spring emerge, families can reflect on months of effort, vigilance, and ingenuity. They have not only survived the winter, they have mastered it. Through observation, planning, and sheer determination, humans turned frozen landscapes into spaces of life and nourishment. Winter was more than a season. It was a teacher. It was a challenge. It revealed the depths of human ingenuity, the power of careful planning, and the strength of shared effort. In firelight, in heated barns, in hidden caches beneath snow, humans discovered that even the harshest cold could be endured, and that survival was not just about enduring the storm, but about understanding, adapting, and creating warmth where none seemed possible. And so in every frozen night, with every frostbitten dawn, humans left behind a legacy of resilience, a story of life beneath the ice, of meals preserved, fires tended, and warmth shared, a story of generations surviving winters that could have ended them, and instead made them stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. Because in the end, winter is not just a test of strength. It is a test of intelligence, patience, and human spirit. And those who mastered its lessons, who learned its secrets, did not merely survive, they triumphed. The nights in winter stretched endlessly, each one testing the limits of endurance. Even as the fire crackled and warmed the room, the cold outside pressed relentlessly against the walls. It whispered through cracks, slipped beneath doors, and reminded everyone that survival was never guaranteed. Every action inside became part of a delicate choreography. Logs were added, but not too many at once. Heated stones were rotated. Stones that had been glowing through the day now radiated warmth into every corner. Even the smallest ember could be the difference between comfort and frostbite. People moved with care, instinctively, their bodies attuned to the subtle language of heat and cold. Sleep was fragmented, punctuated by small shifts to preserve warmth. Children curled into small spaces beside parents, absorbing body heat. Every breath, every movement was mindful. Families developed rituals that seemed ordinary, but were in fact vital for survival. A log placed just so, a stone rotated, a blanket adjusted to catch the heat radiating from the fire. Outside, snow and ice ruled, but inside, life had its rhythm. Meals were shared in quiet reverence. Every morsel of preserved food was valuable. Root vegetables dug from insulated pits, salted meat from winter stores, grains carefully measured. Even the act of eating was strategic. Conserve energy, maintain warmth, sustain life. Children learned the nuances of winter survival through observation and participation. They helped move embers, rearrange straw around storage, feed animals housed indoors, and quietly absorbed lessons that had been passed down for generations. By the time they faced the cold fields, they carried a knowledge deeper than any written guide, an instinctual understanding of the rhythms of frost, snow, and survival. Every element of life was intertwined, provided warmth and nourishment. Heated stones radiated life. Fire guided movement and preserved hope. Even the walls of homes and barns, insulated with straw, dung, and layered wood, were part of the equation. Human ingenuity transformed winter from a threat into a space of life and careful management. Stories whispered at night by the fire carried wisdom. Which roots could endure frost, how to manage heat, how to ration food, how to keep smoke from choking the room. All became part of a living memory. Children listened, remembered, and carried these lessons forward. As winter began to wane, the first green shoots emerged beneath the snow. Families could finally look back at months of meticulous work, vigilance, and careful planning. They had preserved life in the harshest conditions. They had farmed beneath the frost, cared for animals in freezing barns, and kept fire and warmth alive. Every challenge overcome was a testament to resilience, patience, and ingenuity. Frost, snow, and ice. Humans had discovered the art of endurance. They learned that survival was more than strength. It was observation, care, and adaptation. Through fire, heated stones, insulated homes, stored food, and vigilant routines, life persisted. Even when the world outside seemed frozen and unforgiving, inside there was warmth, purpose, and continuity. And in these quiet, tireless efforts, the essence of humanity revealed itself. Not in grand gestures, not in luxury, not in ease, but in the relentless will to endure, to adapt, and to transform even the coldest winter into a living, breathing home. Even as the first thaw began, the lessons of winter remained etched in memory. Families knew the importance of foresight, careful planning, and collective effort. They had survived, not by chance, but by knowledge, observation, and the tireless application of learned wisdom. Winter was no longer merely a season, teacher, a test, and a proving ground. And those who understood it, who respected it, and who worked tirelessly within its challenges, emerged not only alive, but stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. Because in the end, survival in the frozen world was more than enduring, it was mastering. And mastery was achieved not through fear, but through knowledge, patience, and the quiet, persistent warmth of human ingenuity.